Hey everybody, Juan here, and today we're taking a look at the camera quality, the video quality off of the LG Optimus G Pro. Now, LG has delivered a monster phablet with a monster 13 megapixel image sensor, so let's see how it performs. Starting off with a brightly lit nature scene, we see that smartphone tendency to slightly overexpose, especially when trying to properly expose for the flowers. We lose a lot of detail in the sky. You can see where we lose the blue and the clouds sort of clip out, whites in the scene start to clip out, but it's extremely detailed, and thankfully in good light, it's not hunting for focus very often. Following up on a test that we did with the Galaxy S4, you can see reds are still a little bit of a problem because this camera tends to oversaturate just a little bit. Reds are always going to be a problem for digital image sensors, and performance here is about par for the course. I really do wish that LG had given us the option to control saturation like you can do on the HTC. But when your scene isn't predominantly red, you can see that this is an extremely detailed, very crisp camera, responds very well to movement, and in good light, it's locking focus very well. Plus, there's a decent amount of dynamic range to be able to see detail in shadows without completely clipping out the white on these flowers. Now on to a traffic scene. You can see this camera tracks movement very, very well. The image is extremely crisp, the performance is very smooth, but you can see those subtle little jerky hand movements because I don't have the steadiest hands. And this is certainly one area where cameras with optical image stabilization are going to outperform the LG Optimus G Pro. But all in all, especially when compared to cameras without optical image stabilization, it performs very, very well. And also, just as a neat trick, this camera will do front and back video recording at the same time. Although I have to say, for this feature, it's really hard to line up video on yourself and of what you're trying to shoot at the same time and end up with, both sort of in the frame the way you want them to be. And moving into our transition test, it's no surprise that with the extremely powerful hardware on board, that transitions happen very smooth. The exposure blooms just the way that you think it should. You can see a slight buzziness in lateral movement. There's not as much of a problem with rolling shutter like you might see on the Galaxy S4, but this is another instance in which optical image stabilization would probably help us deliver smoother results. Also, this camera does seem to have an issue keeping focus whenever exposure changes or whenever we're in dark situations. Pushing it into an extreme low light situation, you can see the camera is really struggling to lock focus on that microphone. And it seems to be doing the same trick that the HTC One will in ramping down to 20 frames per second just to try and maximize the exposure. Moving over into a more reasonable indoor lighting scenario, we seem to have these subtle problems where, even though I'm trying to keep the microphone front and center and I keep tapping on the screen to re-lock focus onto the microphone, the camera will continue to adjust focus and then focus on the headphones farther away in the scene. And that's kind of frustrating when you're not moving around and when you're trying to keep one subject properly focused. And it just seems to be the way with these new super high resolution image sensors on phones, these 13 megapixel shooters. Indoor performance is good, but it's not going to compare to phones with optical image stabilization. And it's going to have a hard time going up against phones like the HTC One, where there's been a greater priority placed on maximizing light. We can see this very clearly in our nighttime photography scene where there's just not as much dynamic range as there might be on a camera like the Galaxy S4 or the Nokia Lumia 920. Added to that this is a noisy image and there is a little noise reduction at play, but it just sort of makes detail in the scene a little smeary. It's not an unpleasant result, and this video is certainly usable, but it's a little disappointing considering how good the rest of this phone is. And considering how good the results are in good light, you just kind of hope this camera would perform a little bit better at nighttime. You start to lose all of that detail in the neon tubing. So while you end up with very good results, and this camera is certainly better than mid-pack, I find personally that video off of this sensor doesn't quite stand up to what you might achieve with the Galaxy S4, and it's certainly not going to come close to unseating phones like the HTC One or the Nokia Lumia 920. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all on the next review.